Welcome, everybody, to episode 1 of our Perspective series of transforming the employee experience through well-being. My name is Nora Egan, and I'm the Associate Chief of Staff here at Thoughtium. I'm also a registered dietitian, and I have a passion for holistic well-being. I'll be your host today. Here at Thoughtium, we have a progressive view on how well-being can elevate the employee experience. And I'm really excited to unpack that with you over the next 3 weeks. You can find my article, all 3 episodes as they roll out, as well as a toolkit that'll be live at the end of the series at thoughttium.com/perspectives. I'm very excited to welcome our first guest of the series. Her name is Aileen Atxmayer. She's a career coach and a well-being speaker. She's an expert on stress and burnout and has over 15 years of experience helping thousands of people restore their energy and do more of what they love. She works with companies who want to create cultures of well-being and belonging and customizes all of her programs to her customers' and employees' needs. Welcome, Aileen.
Excited to be here.
Hello, I'm excited to have you. Well, I just gave a really short intro, but I thought it would be nice if we could kick off with you giving a little bit of background on where your passion for well-being came from and how you turned it into a career.
Absolutely happy to share. I'll try and reel myself in because the passion is definitely there. So I'd say it goes back to probably around 2008. So my older brother was about 27 years old at the time, and he was the pillar of health in our family. He would run marathons and he was the healthy one. And unfortunately, he was diagnosed with stage 4 Hodgkin's lymphoma and a football-sized tumor in his chest. So I was in grad school at the time, and definitely not the pillar of health and self-care. And this was a big wake-up call for me. So I started to really pause and explore how I was taking care of myself, what wellness and well-being really meant. And then this started my journey to pursuing more knowledge in this space. So I did my 200-hour yoga teacher training, integrative nutrition training, meditation, and breathwork trainings in the subsequent years, but that really was what kicked this off. And then as a career coach, I was really seeing this topic of stress coming up all the time. And I wanted to be able to do something other than help that employee experience in terms of landing a new job. I wanted the employers to have means to keep those people. And since about 2018, I started to bring these conversations to organizations and been doing it ever since. So that's the background for the passion of it in a nutshell.
Wow. Well, we haven't talked about this before, but it's kind of crazy. My origin story is a little bit similar to becoming a dietitian. My older sister was diagnosed with cancer when she was 26. And it greatly changed the trajectory of my life in high school, too. So very cool that it brought us both here today.
Yeah,
Yeah, that is crazy. Well, I'd love to start just with grounding us, since we're talking about transforming employee experience through well-being. Maybe people are used to hearing the word wellness, corporate wellness, wellness stipends, those types of terms in the workplace. And here at Thoughtium, we believe that the word that should be used is well-being, because wellness means, as you know, the absence of illness. Well-being encapsulates the whole person, all the different aspects of their lives. And I know that we talked about this a little bit, but I'd love to hear how you define those words and like how that's evolved in your 15 plus years in this space.
It's such an interesting topic because I think I've only noticed more of the well-being shift in the last few years. And no matter what, I think it's a good thing. No matter what you call it, the fact that the conversations are happening is huge and so important. And I think of it really similarly. So you and I in our previous chats have seen a lot of alignment, but I think wellness, there's nothing bad or wrong about it, but I do think it's less expansive and it has its limitations. So if we think about wellness as a lack of illness, kind of the opposite of that, that's still an important thing, but well-being really captures so much more. I think of it as the whole person approach to providing resources to support people to be their best selves, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And it doesn't all have to happen in the workplace, but even just providing space and names to acknowledge that that is what people bring to the table can be really important.
Right. When I first started to talk about this at Thoughtium and with my team, the first thing I did was interview our 13 team members, and just starting with the conversation of what does wellness mean to you, all 13 people had different answers. And that was like the first time as a dietitian, I thought it would be a lot of things that I could provide in my expertise, but very quickly it was like, no, every person is so individual. And that was cool, even with such a small sample size, to realize there's so many more things that we could be covering than just the usual topics.
Yeah, it can be really eye-opening too. Even, and I think that example is so important because you're in the wellness, well-being space, and yet through conversations, you saw, you know what? There's actually so many more ways or avenues of approaching this, and it expanded your own view. And I think
Right.
organizations are starting to catch on to that too.
Yeah, I was totally okay with being wrong. One question I'd love to ask is, like, today, what is going on with employees and why have needs shifted differently than what they were before?
You have like an hour for this, right? So I will try to keep this succinct because there is
Yeah.
so much going on. But if I had to boil it down, I'd say there's really two main things happening. One is that employees are burning out, and we've seen the statistics that show this. And the second thing is that they're waking up. So, having worked for 15 years and seeing why people leave organizations, there's usually two main factors. One is the work environment, whether that be toxic environment or even just a lack of recognition, praise, professional development opportunities. That's kind of area one. And then area two is from the employee, just a lack of ability to use the skills and the values that they hold dear to them in that organization. So we've noticed that, particularly over the last few years, we have gotten a little bit more of a perspective shift. Employees have seen, you know what, we spend a third of our lives at work and something's got to give. If I'm burning out, whether that be due to personal or professional challenges or factors, burnout is burnout and something has to give at that point. So I think that employees are, when they were given opportunities to have work look differently, they don't want to relinquish that. And now these conversations are happening to reimagine what this can look like for both the organization and the employee. So a few different factors, but I'd say burnout, number one, and number two is this really increased sense of an empowerment of employees to say, hey, this is actually what we need to continue to stay at this organization.
Which is such a cool shift that you've gotten to like see unfold a little bit. And just to ground us a little bit and like how you define burnout, because I think it's something we hear a lot. It's in a lot of articles, but like, what does it mean to you in your experience?
Yeah, I like that you asked this because I think it gets overused sometimes, especially in recent
Right.
years. So,
Yeah.
stress and burnout are not mutually exclusive, but there is a difference. So, stress, we know what that is. And if we want to geek out about it a little, it's the physiological response to a
Happily.
perceived threat. And your fight, flight, freeze mode goes on. And it's a physiological response to that. And ideally, we avoid or move from that threat, and then we turn that stress response off, turning our parasympathetic nervous system on. Lots of nerdy talk for saying, like, that's what that is. But burnout is when those stressors, and there can be various stressors, when they're chronic exposures and we're never really escaping them, and then we are really in a heightened state of that stress response with no end in sight, and we're depleting our resources. So burnout originally was coined in 1975 by Herbert Freudenberger, and it just had to do with the workplace. But we know that people don't burn out just because of work. And I think the last few
Right.
years have really shown more of a light on that. And really, no matter what, the three factors are a really deep kind of bone tired, this emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, so a lack of really feeling like you can be sympathetic, empathetic, or more person outside of yourself oriented, and then a decreased sense of accomplishment. So the sense of, why bother? What's the point anyway? You're feeling there's no efficacy to your actions. So I'll stop myself there, but I think it's so important to kind of delineate between stress, burnout, and then how one can feed into the other.
Yeah. And just when I think about like my work as a dietitian too, I focus a lot on like gut and hormonal health. And a lot of those things are like caused or like can be worsened by like chronic overwhelm or burnout. It sounds like are like very similar terms in that.
Yes, absolutely.
And one thing that I know might fall underneath or it's next to, but part of why people leave the workforce along with burnout can be misalignment. And obviously, that's something that can't always be fixed in the workplace with that person. But how do you address like misalignment when you're working, whether it's as a career coach or when you're working with companies?
I think that part of it is recognizing both from the organization as well as the person or the employee that
Hmm.
there's nothing wrong if we outgrow our existing roles and responsibilities. And in fact, that the organization's doing a good thing if that's happening. And
Mm.
just recognizing that people who we are at 42 is going to be different than 22. And then our roles need to reflect that and create space for that growth is an important kind of foundational practice to keep in mind. So for organizations, having opportunities for that professional development, and it doesn't have to be cookie cutter, but having managers, even if it's just once a year at performance reviews, say, hey, like, here's your job. Yes, you're checking the boxes, but what's interesting to you? Are you wanting to gain skills in X, Y, or Z areas, or what would be exciting to you can make a huge difference. And then from the employee kind of perspective, a lot of times we're in that go, go, go. Speaking of burnout, we don't really
Yeah.
zoom out sometimes. And life events like the pandemic or personal experiences can create that perspective shift that then oftentimes leads to this exploration of, what do I really want my work to mean to me? And is there a way for me? What is the way for me to do that? And it doesn't mean that you have to leave the organization a lot of the times. There's this concept called job crafting where
Mm.
you can explore, hey, these are the things I want to do. It's not kind of how my job is laid out right now, but let's have some conversations. Can I do a little shadowing with this other team, whatever it might be? And when organizations can have those conversations and explore creative ways of satiating that lifelong learner or intellectually curious employee, it can pay off for both parties.
I love that. And I love that you said it's a good thing for companies if someone outgrows that role or wants to expand into a different area, that's saying you did a good job and like they outgrow it. And luckily I at Thoughtium am allowed to explore different areas. Like when I came in, I didn't think well-being would be a topic we would be talking about, but I'm lucky to be surrounded by people who are just as curious and lifelong learners. So it's really cool to make that a kudos to the companies as well and not a loss for them.
Yeah, I'm gonna butcher the quote, but I don't know if you're a Ted Lasso fan, but
I
Higgins
am.
from Ted Lasso, there's some quote he says where a good mentor will be sad when you leave, but a great mentor will expect you to, something like that. Where, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying people have to leave the organizations, but to anticipate and expect and even demand that growth can be
Right.
kind of a good culture. Yeah.
Right. Shifting a little bit to more of the study side. So we've discussed, I think people have seen or heard well-being or wellness programs are a waste of money. Like, why would you bother? What's the return going to be on it? Can you talk a little bit about why that's not true and like what we can expect from making these worthy investments?
There was a lot of buzz and a lot of conversations happening when these articles came out. And I think it's important to note two things. One is that the unfortunate thing is the titles, the headlines themselves were a bit of a clickbait approach to this study. But the second thing is
Hmm.
while there were limitations to the study, there were also some important findings. So kind of to summarize the whole thing, the study was showing that one-off things like access to an app or some meditation at work doesn't have a profound impact on employee well-being. Well, kind
Right.
of
Duh.
not rocket science, right? But
Hmm.
what I think is interesting and important about the study is that it said we have to look at not just a top down but a top down and bottom up approach. You can't just slap some yoga classes and meditations out there for your employees and expect that that will capture well-being. If the systems and the culture that these employees are existing within is broken, the onus is, number one, not on the employee, but number two, there's only so much that a stress management course can do. If that
Right.
stressor is still that environment, something's got to give. So I think that it's unfortunate that the clickbait approach was taken because it really takes away from the incredible impact that uh, practitioners are having in this space on employee well-being, but also all the work organizations have done to create these programs for their employees benefit. So the good news about it is people started talking, and I think that the overall takeaway was one with more intention and more clarity. It's, hey, this is not a baby throwing the baby out with the bathwater, whatever that weird saying is. It's, let's look at what is true about this, and then what we can use from that to really be more holistic and integrative in our approach moving forward.
Right. And I love that you said, like, these people have the best intentions. Like, the point is, we're talking about it, we're trying. And even if they're not doing it right or well, like, it's a start. And I'd love to hear a little bit about, like, what companies have done wrong, whether they've called you in and you're like, we need to completely revamp this, or like maybe you add things to what they're already doing, but what kinds of things are you seeing?
So I'll clarify. This is not kind of demonizing or pointing fingers. I like to assume, and maybe it's naive of me, but I like to assume best intentions, especially when someone's coming to me for any employee well-being needs, because the fact is some organizations aren't really doing it. So I like to assume good intent, but where there's a growth edge or some room for improvement is often employees are smart. They know when it's performative. So some organizations who just do Pizza Friday, or they put a foosball table, in the break room, whatever it might be, employees, that's not scratching the itch for them. They'd rather you do nothing sometimes than do things like that feel like white noise. So I'd say the wrong thing is not really getting a real read on what the employee needs are. If people are saying they're struggling with their mental health, then the pizza party won't really cut it. So I'd say that the room for improvement there is really looking at quality over quantity and saying, there's a statistic. I think the U.S. Surgeon General said, I think it was in 2023, there was a push to have workplace well-being be a main priority. And the statistics, something like 75% of Americans had said that they experienced at least one mental health condition, like symptoms from it in the last year. And that 80+% of them said the workplace had some contributing factor related to that, was part of the cause. And so when we look at those statistics, we know we really need to do that deeper work. And it doesn't mean spending $1 million. It doesn't mean, a million different things. In fact, sometimes the wrong thing is when organizations do too much. And I noticed that really in 2020 and early 2021 as well. It's here, do all the things you're supposed to do and attend all the things to take good care of yourself. And it kind of was a law of diminishing returns there.
Yeah, an overcorrection.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that you just pointed out, like, employees can see through some of the smoke and mirrors with that, and like employees know when you actually are valuing their well-being and when you're actually investing in those things. And one other thing that I've researched a lot of and talked about in the workplace is the sense of belonging, and not the we're a family type of belonging, but the true, like, I want to work here, I want to put in work for you and for this company. Can you talk a little bit about what belonging should look like or could look like?
It's an interesting topic because some people have trouble defining it. And like you said, another turn off for employees is we're family, but then, they get 1 week notice and limited severance and so forth. Like, no, that's not really how we treat family. So I think that belonging in a nutshell is creating this sense of a person's ability to show up at their organization and be themselves, and have that psychological safety there too. They don't feel like they have their fully different work persona and then their personal life persona. It's this sense of trust and ease that you don't have to be best friends with everyone. I think that can be a false assumption too, but it's this psychological safety and sense of I'm a person and I'm treated like one through various means, but really that's the foundation of it.
Yeah, love that it would be ease and trust.
Mm-hmm.
Now that we've talked a little bit about the negative side of, like, what's missing, what do we need to do more of, I'd love to talk a little bit more about, like, how to design something that works, how to design something where employees flourish and feel ease and trust in the workplace. Like, when you're entering a workspace, where do you begin?
Yeah. I think this can feel daunting and overwhelming if an organization doesn't have much going on in this space. I would say many
Yeah,
have at least a baseline, and it might be more of the wellness versus well-being. So they might have their basic employee assistance program, or something that's often tethered more to the physical health, which we don't want to diminish the importance or value of that. But if
right.
they're really trying to be more expansive and broaden that net, one interesting way to approach it, well, there's two things I'll say. One is you
Yeah.
could take a kind of reverse engineering approach and look at the 6 factors that contribute to burnout in the workplace, recognize what they are, and then try to create opportunities to counter that. So
Okay.
Dr. Christina Masloch is one of the founding researchers on burnout in the workplace. And let's see if I can get them all, but it's employees burn out because of a lack of control, insufficient reward, a lack of community, absence of fairness. I'll check my notes here. Conflict in values and work overload. So if you know that's what will burn people out, start there and see which of these are existing in the organization now, and which of these do we have room to address or counteract or mitigate. So that's one way.
Yeah.
The other way is to just keep it simple. I think just like any habit change, you as a dietitian know with your clients, I am sure
Hmm.
that less is more. And if you start with, hey, eat 1 bite of spinach versus 50% of your plate being veggies, you're going to have more of a
Right.
win. We know this is
Right.
neuroscience. So instead, maybe it's what is, even just from water cooler talk, what is something that we know people are struggling with, and how can we do something to address that unmet need or that challenge, and then go from there. So really being intentional and in the strategy, I think, is key.
Yeah. And even having 6 pockets to address just makes it more digestible. It's like it's a lot to unpack, and I'd love to hear a little bit more of like why can't it be a one size fits all program? Why do you have to curate this to each company individually?
Well, so I have my beliefs on this. I think sometimes
Yeah,
there are programs that exist that are more one size fit all, and some organizations, I think something is better than nothing when it comes to
right.
trying. And sometimes there's kind of what they come to me and call cookie cutter. Oh, we have a vendor and they do these programs, but it's not customized, it's not interactive, and
Okay.
they'll usually say it's fine. But the challenge is that twofold. Employees don't really feel seen then. If we can come up with, when I do my intake with organizations, I say, okay, tell me what's going on. So I just did one the other day, and one of the things they said that employees are feeling anxious about is the return to work
Right.
order was doubled, and the many of the employees had gotten pets over the last few years, and they were feeling anxious and stressed about leaving their pet home for twice as long alone. So it
Mhm.
might sound frivolous or trivial, but if these are real anxieties of your employees, then how can you integrate even that kind of anecdote in a program and have them feel valued, have them feel that sense of belonging, have them feel seen? The other kind of component, the second piece, is that if you try just kind of a one size fits all, people are people, and they are, for that person who's anxious about leaving their dog. My first one investor, I get it. I
Yeah.
see these people.
Yeah.
But for the other person, I'm like, that's weird. I don't get that. And that is not anything in my wheelhouse or not a
Right.
concern to me. And then you miss meeting their needs. So there are some things that are consistent across many employees, but I'd say if you try to just do kind of a one and done, one size fits all, you're really usually missing a wide swath of people.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm sure that the people that you usually get to talk to are like the HR, the people and culture leaders, people that are aware or trying to be aware of what their team really needs. When you start these conversations, like how do you know you're not just getting the message from the top of the leadership and you're actually hearing what the employee at the bottom needs too?
So you can kind of tell just from the answers to questions. So I have kind of a list of questions that I ask to get at really exactly the heart of it, right? What are people saying? What
Hmm.
is this pain point? And if it sounds very robotic or there's honestly not really answers, again, no judgment. If they're doing it, I'm glad they're trying to provide something. But of course, the dream
Right.
scenario is the leadership really believes in it. And also, things will be more impactful if they're walking the talk. So instead of having a program saying, about the power of rest and talking about how you should take your PTO and all that, if
Mm-hmm.
that happens and leadership takes the PTO and they're not joining meetings from their vacation, right? Like that is
Right.
much more impactful than
Yeah.
just the performative piece. So you can kind of tell just by some of the answers to the questions. But I will say the majority, there's been a really big shift in the last few years. So I started doing these programs about 2018, and I used
Mm-hmm.
to feel like I needed to do a little bit more convincing of here's why this is a good idea. And now I don't feel like that most of the time. Most of the time I'm being kind of not sold to, but talked to, like, yeah, this is important. We really need to do this. And we want to do it
Cool.
because of that. So it's a really powerful shift.
Yeah. That's amazing that you're not having to go in and explain it all the time right away. I know from us trying to start a program within our own team at Thoughtium and the thought of bringing it to other places, the question could come up of like, but what does this mean for the business? And sure, some things are measurable, some things are not. But if we had a leader listening right now, what would you tell them of like why this is an important investment to be making?
I have so many things to say, but there are a lot of statistics and data out there. So I would encourage people to kind of explore that. But there's kind of the common sense or person focused answer, and then there's the business case
Hmm.
answer. So
Okay.
the more common sense approach is just as a human, if you think about if you have your employees, if you can provide tools, resources, and support that helps them sleep better, helps them manage the stress, and you know that stress is just an inevitable part of life, whether it comes from work or elsewhere. If you can give them the tools to take good care of themselves and
Hmm.
do these basic human needs, have them met, it's just it's just plain the reality of it that they're going to do their
Right.
jobs better. If even just looking at the metric of sleep alone, if you help them with their sleep,
Hmm.
that can have an incredible impact on literally every area of their life, especially their productivity, their memory, their problem solving, their creativity. So
Hmm.
there's the common sense approach, but then if you have the person that's and not judging, we have budgets and
Yeah.
resources, but if you take the business case approach, think about the cost of not doing it. Instead of thinking just about the investment in the people, think about the
Hmm.
risk of the bottom line, the loss to the bottom line of not doing it. So we know that the cost of replacing employees when they leave is between, I think it's between 30, 30-ish and 150% of that person's annual salary. So
Hmm.
those recruitment efforts, the not to mention kind of the burnout then on the other people on the team who are absorbing that work until the hire has been
Right.
kind of put in place and then trained. So there are costs there, and the statistics really show that when there is that culture of health and well-being, it's
Hmm.
about 11% lower turnover than organizations where employee well-being is not a priority. So the data is
Hmm.
there, but even just taking that common sense approach can make that, I think, more motivating to prioritize.
Yeah. We know there's loads of qualitative, but it always is nice to have a couple of numbers to give people to really show them. And I love the look at the what you're not or what you could lose by not doing it. I think that's a nice reframe.
Yeah.
And just this is one of my last questions, but as we think about people that might be listening and are thinking, okay, yeah, maybe this is something I need to start thinking about. They might not be ready to fully invest in a program, but what would you tell people to just go from that knowing to doing and like just starting somewhere?
I'd say ask your people. This doesn't have to be a very high budget, high resource, high output approach from the start. And like we just talked about, sometimes the baby step approach can be the thing that is a catalyst for bigger change and bigger programs in the future. So it can literally be like Survey Monkey or something where
Yeah.
or every manager ask them if there's an all hands meeting once a whatever, check in then. Or if managers are meeting every so often, getting those we call it anic data, but it's still pretty
Yeah.
impressive to get the
Mhm.
findings. So get a sense of where people want the support and then go for the quality over quantity. So starting there can, it sounds really oversimplified, but it's going to help with people having that sense of feeling seen, valued, and that sense of belonging to even be asked those questions in the first place.
Totally, totally. I love that, and so approachable. Well, I'm gonna shift a little bit into some rapid fire questions. These you haven't heard yet, but I'm sure will be very easy for you to answer. The first one is, what is one addition or shift that you have made to improve your own well-being?
I would say my Aura Ring. So I don't think
Oh,
everyone
okay.
needs them, and I think there
Yeah,
is such thing as too much data for some
this is
people.
not sponsored.
Yes, not sponsored, unless you want to sponsor me, Aura. But it really is impactful because I teach this stuff, but knowing versus doing, like you just said, sometimes
Yeah,
I have the data to say, Aileen, take a beat, take a minute. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, love that. And one more is, what is one tip that you would give someone, an individual, to start doing today?
I think it's going to sound too simple, but it's to breathe. I
Mm-hmm.
think the statistic is something like 80% of people have a breathing dysfunction, which isn't as scary as it sounds. We're breathing in a way that is not optimal for our health and well-being. So if
Mm-hmm.
there's even a concept called screen apnea, when we're staring at screens, we have a more shallow pace of breath, and that can kick off that stress cycle. So I'd say it's a free, simple, powerful, and really impactful tool that people can do anywhere, anytime. And again, it sounds simple, but sometimes it can be harder to implement, but
Yeah,
really powerful practice. Yeah,
and that one's free.
exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Aileen, for joining me today. I learned a lot. I hope everybody else did too. It was great to hear about your experience and all of the good that you're doing for all these companies and individuals. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Nora. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks. Bye bye. Thank you to everyone for tuning into the first episode of this Perspective series. Be sure to tune into our next two episodes. Next week, I'll be joined by Max Schneider, the founder of Sand and Salt Escapes. And we're going to wrap the series with Thoughtium's very own Amanda Lobo and Nicole Deal. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next